Notre Dame went 10-2 in 2019, 11-2 after finishing up with a bowl win, barely missing out on the college football playoff, which they had made the previous season in 2018. Can they improve in 2020? Can they get a little bit better? Can they make the college football playoff again in 2020 with a schedule that includes only 3 true road games? That's the good news. The bad news: 3 neutral site games, one of which is on another continent. In today's video, we're going to take a look at Notre Dame's 2020 schedule, and we're going to do that right now. Hey, good morning, it's Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right, it's me, Uncle Lou, and I'm live for you on LouTube today. Thanks for watching, I really appreciate it also. And in addition to that as well, subscribe to this channel if you're not already. I post college football videos almost every single day of the year, and a lot of them are even watchable. This one, I think, might be. Stay tuned. We're going to take a look at Notre Dame's 2020 football schedule. Now, this isn't a prediction video. I'm not going to try to predict how Notre Dame might do in 2020. I do a series of videos later in the offseason when we know a little bit more about what these teams are going to look like, where I go through and try to predict a bunch of teams' records and who they might win and lose against, that kind of thing. This video, we're just purely taking a look at the schedule. Does it look harder than 2019? Does it look easier than 2019? Is the road to a playoff or a conference championship or whatever the case? Well, it wouldn't be no conference championship game in a Notre Dame video. They're too pussy to join a conference. We'll compare the road schedule from last year to this year, the non-con schedule. Well, every game's a non-con game for Notre Dame. Let's just be real. They're 1 foot in, 1 foot out of the ACC. They're in there all the way in basketball. In football, they're not technically in the ACC, but they are required to play 5 ACC teams a year. Are those 5 teams in 2020 more difficult than 2019, or is the road a little bit easier? That's what we're going to try to figure out in today's video. Let's do it right now. Hard to believe Brian Kelly's been the head coach in South Bend for 10 years already, heading into his 11th season now in 2020. If I looked this up ahead of time, but if you'd asked me before I looked any of this stuff up, I knew he'd been there a while. I probably would have said 6, 7, 8 years, something like that. Bumpy road for Brian Kelly at Notre Dame, though. First 5 or 6 years especially. There was a period of time where it looked like he wasn't going to last much longer. He had a contentious relationship with the media. He's considered kind of standoffish, and some of the fans did start to turn on him after some down seasons, or what they considered to be down seasons. But the last 3 years have gone pretty good for Brian Kelly at Notre Dame. The last 3 years, they've gone 10-3, 12-1. That was, of course, the playoff year, 12-0 in the regular season before losing to Clemson in round 1 of the playoffs, and then 11-2 last year after their bowl win, barely missing out on the college football playoff, 10-2 in the regular season. Here's the 2019 schedule just as a reference point so that when we look at the 2020 schedule, we sort of have something to compare it to. But like I mentioned, they went 10-2 in the regular season. Here it is. The 2 losses, of course, came on the road. First up, they lost week 4 on the road at the University of Georgia. And, of course, they also lost on the road at Michigan. That was a disappointing loss. Not necessarily that they lost. Michigan was an okay team, but they were actually struggling heading into that game. Michigan destroyed them 45-14. Georgia on the road in Athens, 23-17, a pretty good game. They really weren't tested outside of that. They had a game sort of late in the season against Virginia Tech where they struggled. It was a little unexpected, ended up winning 21-20. And then against Virginia, they were actually down at halftime in that game. Then ended up winning that one fairly comfortable. I think it was, did I write it down? 45-20 or something like that. I don't think I wrote it down. 35-20, I did. 35-20. Outside of that, they pretty much handled everybody they played. They were a good team. Were they great in 2019? Not great. I mean, when you lose to the two best teams you play, I don't know if you can consider yourself great, but they were really, really good, finishing 11-2. Their road games last year, 5 road games last year. I mentioned at the top, and we'll see in a second when we look at 2020, only 3 true road games for Notre Dame this year, but they had 5 last year. At Louisville to kick things off, then at Georgia, which they lost, at Michigan, which they lost, and then at Duke and at Stanford to close the season. So they went 3-2 there on the road. Their 2 toughest games, clearly at Georgia, at Michigan. They lost both of those. Their best wins, when you look back on it now, the Virginia win was pretty good. They did beat Southern Cal 30-27. Southern Cal was a sort of an up and down team, but you did beat them 30-27. Those were probably 2 of your best wins. I mean, winning at Duke, Boston College, Stanford had a down year, Bowling Green, New Mexico. So not really any great wins for Notre Dame. They pretty much won the games they were supposed to, and they lost the games that they were underdogs in. Michigan and Georgia, 10-2, 11-1 after the bowl win. All right, let's take a look at the 2020 schedule. Can Notre Dame improve off of 2019? I mentioned at the top, sort of a weird schedule. Only 3 true road games. First true road game is not until week 8 at Pitt. I think that's like October 17th or something like that. So a long way into the season when you play your first true road game in terms of, an away environment where you have to deal with another team's home crowd. Now, you do have 3 of your first 6 games, or 3 of the first 6 weeks of the season, you play neutral site games. You kick things off in 2020 in the quote-unquote week 0 game this year, played on like August 26th, is it? A full week before the rest of college football really gets going. You take on Navy, the Service Academy, in Dublin, Ireland. I think this will be a popular game just because it's played in Ireland. I know Notre Dame has a history of playing Navy, so I'm not I'm not knocking you for scheduling Navy or anything like that. They're not a Power 5 team, but there's a lot of history in this game. And as much as I am not a fan of Notre Dame, it is kind of cool to see Notre Dame play in Ireland. So we get to see that week 0 when you take on Navy in that neutral site game. You can call it a road game in that you have to travel, but a true road game is played in another team's stadium in front of their home crowd. This is a concept that's completely foreign to Florida fans. When I mention all the time, Florida hasn't played a non-conference road game outside of the state of Florida since 1989. Now, that's pitiful, sad, and pathetic. Now, they want to argue with me and claim that a neutral site game against Michigan was a road game. They want to argue with me and claim that bowl games played outside the state of Florida are road games. No, they're neutral site games. I mean, that's why there are different designations between the two, right? When Georgia plays Florida every year in Jacksonville, is that a road game for Florida? No, it's a neutral site game. It's not a road game for Georgia either. It's a neutral site game. Why? It's played at a neutral site. It's not a road game. What's a road game? A road game is when you play on the road in another team's home stadium. Florida hasn't done that since 1989. So even though you travel to play Navy, no, it's not a road game. It's a neutral site game. I really wish Florida fans could wrap their feeble minds around that fairly simple concept. You then have a bye week when everyone else is going to be playing their week 1 games. So you're in a similar situation to what Florida and Miami were in last year. They played in the week 0 game last year. Then they were off week 1 while everyone else played. Because of that, you get 2 bye weeks this year. Last year, everybody got 2 bye weeks. And then Florida and Miami had 3 bye weeks because they played in week 0. 2020, everyone is back to getting 1 bye week, but Notre Dame gets 2 because they kick things off week 0. So you have a bye week when everyone else is playing their first game. Then you host an SEC team, Arkansas. Was it last year you played them or the year before? I think it was the year before when you played them. But you play them. That's your next game. Western Michigan. Then you play 2 more neutral site games back to back. You play Wake Forest, neutral site game, Charlotte. Again, I get it. Wake Forest is from the state of North Carolina. Notre Dame is from the state of Indiana. You got to go there to play. Still not a road game. It's a neutral site game. This one's played in Charlotte, Bank of America Stadium. Follow that up with another neutral site game against Wisconsin at Lambeau Field. Great, it's in Wisconsin. You got to go there to play. Amazing. Still a neutral site game, not a road game. If it was a road game, it'd be played at Camp Randall. So anyway, three out of the first, 5 games are neutral site games, home games against Arkansas and Western Michigan. You then host Stanford at home before having your first true road game of the year on the road at Pitt. Then you get your bye week, Duke, Clemson at home, coming off of that bye week. That Clemson game will be huge. We can't underestimate that. I'm excited about that game because rarely do we get a game like this that late in the season. Because Notre Dame's not fully in the ACC, they don't play Clemson every year. So technically, we do see a lot of conference games late in the year that are huge and important. So it's not that we don't see big important games late in the season, but this just doesn't feel like a conference game because, well, it's not. Because like I mentioned before, Notre Dame, too pussy to join a conference. But that will be an important game, though, one that a lot of people will be watching. You host Clemson. They'll likely be undefeated at that point. Taking a look at your schedule, you might be undefeated at that point. I wouldn't call this the easiest schedule I've ever seen. The Wisconsin game will be tough. How's Pitt going to be this year? Probably not very good. Arkansas is one of the worst teams in the SEC. Western Michigan, Wake Forest, the best player on their team, now plays for the University of Georgia. Shout out Jamie Newman. That's my dude in that. Third in the Heisman odds. Type about it down below. I know you're mad and worried. I don't blame you. But that'll be a huge game, that Clemson game. Then you go on the road, take on Georgia Tech. Year or two of a complete rebuild there under Jeff Collins, getting away from the triple option that Paul Johnson ran forever over there, installing a modern-day offense. They really struggled last year. I'm not sure how much improvement people are expecting year 2 out of Georgia Tech, but you do have to play them there. Come back home. You host Louisville before closing up your season on the road at Southern Cal. So recap the 2020 schedule. 3 road games at Pitt, at Georgia Tech, at Southern Cal, all come in the second half of the season. 3 neutral site games, one of which is on a different continent. You open things up in Ireland, Dublin, Ireland, against Navy. You also play Wake Forest in Charlotte and Wisconsin at Lambeau Field. 3 neutral site games. Tougher or harder than the 2019 schedule? The last 4 games of this schedule, I think, will not be easy. If Notre Dame finds itself in a situation where maybe they are struggling with a couple of injuries late in the year to key positions or something like that, maybe they stumble there. But your last 4 games of the year, you host Clemson, play on the road at Georgia Tech. That's probably the easiest of your last 4. Then you host Louisville, who, in my mind, impressed me last year. Not that they were great or their record was great, but they were so bad the year before. I thought they exceeded expectations. Year 1 new coaching staff there in Louisville. I do think they'll be an improved team in the ACC. Maybe a sleeper. Hard to pick a sleeper in the ACC because Clemson is so far ahead of everyone else. When you call Louisville a sleeper, you're like, maybe they're the team that ends up being the second or third best team in the ACC, way behind Clemson. But I think Louisville could surprise some people this year. That's potentially a tough game late in the year. And then, of course, you close things out on the road at Southern Cal, who, unfortunately for Trojan fans, still stuck with a coach, doesn't know what he's doing, go by the name of Clay Helton. So those last 4 games are pretty tough. Of course, the Wisconsin game at Lambeau Field about halfway through the season. Is Stanford going to improve? They were a disappointment last year. So I think the schedule is probably a little bit easier than what it was last year, and here's why. You had to play Georgia and Michigan on the road last year. Those were 2 top 15 teams. In Georgia's case, a top 5 team. Would they finish 4th or 5th in the last poll? Whatever it was. You don't have anything on your schedule like that this year other than Clemson, and you get them at home. So you had 2 tough matchups, top 15-ish type matchups last year. They were both on the road. This year, you really only have the one, unless one of these other teams comes out of nowhere. You really only have the one, and you get it at home, and it's against Clemson. Now, that's a tough game, a brutal game, but it's only one, whereas last year you had the 2. 11-1, I think, is a possibility. Again, I'll do some prediction videos later in the summer. The expectations are going to be high in South Bend. They always are. We'll see how they can do. Anyway, that's going to wrap it up for the Notre Dame 2020 schedule preview. Let me know down below what you think about this schedule. Any trap games on here? If you had to pick a loss for Notre Dame that's sort of out of the blue, what game would that be? Not Clemson. No one would be surprised if they lost to Clemson. I'll say this. Outside of Clemson, which team on this schedule do you think is most likely to give Notre Dame a game? If I told you right now Notre Dame's going to go 10-2 and that one of the teams they're going to lose to is going to be Clemson, who would you think would be the second team they would lose to? Let me know in the comments down below. Anyway, appreciate you guys watching. And before we end, I'll let you enjoy one more time this pointless idiot.